Sarache, Boy Kudia Son Sarache, Negetru de Tiche, Morson Tosa Chembago, Ulbichem Mogo Purnarache, Sobor Son Sarar Dusre Ashtenam Goa Osleam Sogoya Eta, Koshi Sanweta, Uche Morin Suku, Mogo Pauta, Ucha Locato, Mogtaka Melta, Yakoria Mogan, Tanamuka Newta. Morit Pulanche, Kudia Son Sarache, Ketru de Meche, Morson Tosa Chembago, Urbeche Mogo Purnarache, Sogor Son Sarar Tusre Ashchenam Goa Osleamche. Mogtaka Melta, Yakoria Mogan, Tanamuga Newta. Wakoin Karache, Morit Pulanche, Kudia Son Sarache, Ketru de Deche, Morson Tosa Chembago, Urbeche Mogo Purnarache. Sobor Son Sarar Dusre Ashchenam Goa Osleamche. From Goa with love, Goa with love, Goa with love. From Goa with love, Goa with love, Goa with love. From Goa with love, Goa with love, Goa with love.
And as we start to understand a little bit more about the world, we realize an art form called Tiatr has actually been very instrumental in refining the human race. When you see an artist perform with a particular human behavior and interact with another artist who's also performing a human behavior and creating a story, a human story, we see a lot of our own selves. And this is a very lovely manifestation of ourselves, because theatre is about taking slices of life and representing them. Now, as we understand this part, the further advantage of being able to see yourself in action, just like how you do things, is also a very nice way of understanding yourself. I'm quite sure of this, and probably you are too. So, understanding theatre and where this came from would probably be a very interesting story. And as we know, life is all about stories, and this is a story of the initial stages before the element of Tiatr. Now, a podcast from before, which was the second podcast, spoke specifically about an art form in Goa, which is the most popular art form and has been going on since 1892. Now that means about more than 130 years. So this is a very popular art form which has only lived because of the audiences and all the people who really like to go and support this art form. The interesting part here is to understand that this was an art form that began way before the governance. So there was no government of India at this time. There was still the Portuguese governance, and this had a lot of history, which we also don't understand, because when we understand India, we think as British India. However, there was a Portuguese colony, and this was Goa, and there were other colonies as well, like the Dutch were here, and the French were here also. But coming back to the point, as Goa was a Portuguese colony, the government here was the dictator, of course, and were very repressive with regards to expression, like in every part of the world. You see, there is a system where celebrations are allowed in every personal space, but in a collective space, it's seen as a little bit more conservatively. So what we understand here is, when you example Carnival as one of the celebrations, you understand that Carnival is a celebration that has been celebrated all over the world, and it is coming from predominantly a Christian side. However, this also has an impact on other societies around, and hence this particular carnival, for instance, is actually performed all over the world and is practiced all over the world, except in spaces where entertainment in itself is looked at extremely conservatively. So now this is the outlook of the place, and the outlook of the place that we are talking about now, which is Goa, is a place that was liberated from the Portuguese, and this happened in the year 1961. However, the point being, the art forms that were being performed within the society kept on going, irrespective of who was governing or who was the dictator, etc., etc. So here we understand the difference between politics and art. Art has always been there, and politics as well, but they have been extremely individualistically seen. And here, with regards to theatre, theatre was some sort of behavior which could be shown to you, which was quite typical, in which all typicalities could be revealed with nice expressions and costumes and some music in the background. So to understand exactly where theatre came from in Goa, we had spoken about the khel. Now the khel, or the fail, or what it is called in English is the street play, is something which was always prevailing in Goa even before Tiatr. And Tiatr was in 1892. So there was entertainment most definitely in societies of the world. And in this society, from the region of Goa, the idea was to have theatre and show it to the public, and hence this will help a sort of transformation. So the style here was simple. It was making stories out of human stories which existed, and then these were all put together and sort of mixed around with dialogues from different situations, and a very nice journey was created for the person who was looking at this. Now, to understand this well, let's see what was happening. Was suddenly in the middle of the streets there was a group coming of people and musicians, and they would start with some songs, and that would already attract the people walking around, since it was a public place. As this happened and the crowd gathered, they would begin a performance of a play. And these were actually in 3, which means there were 3 plays played out, one after the other, and each was of a duration of about 45 minutes. Now, these plays were basically musicals as we understand them in the Western world, where they were using elements of song. So now what was going on here was it was a musical which would start, and many dialogues, instead of being delivered as a dialogue, would be delivered in song. And the repeat dialogue and the reaction would also sometimes come in a song. So it was quite a musical, and it was a play of words and lyrics which would rhyme predominantly. So with a lot of these rhymes, it was very, very entertaining. And of course, there were elements of comedy and different types of emotion involved. The comedy was always, of course, within the play structure. When the story was going on, there were parts of the story that would give you comic relief. So there were no jokes which were separately being played as such. This was within the whole play idea. Now, these were plays which were taking place in the middle of the street and were taking place before the concept of Tiatr began. And these were taking place in the region of Goa. They were taking place in the language Konkani. And these were elements that the society had built together themselves. Now, if you understand the idea of Goa, it is a tiny state in India, and the population of the state currently is about 1.5 million plus. However, during this time, when there was the decision for making Goa into a state or merging with an already well-known state called Maharashtra, which was next door in India and part of India, this was a phenomenon that took place way back, and it had something wherein the wishes of the people were taken into consideration as to this particular region, Goa, when it was freed by the Portuguese, whom it would be part of, or would it be a separate state in itself. Now, this led to understanding why states have been made in India and on what grounds. They have been made on the grounds of language spoken in that region. So, as spoken about in the last episode, on this particular topic, which was the second podcast, this idea of when you can establish very clearly that we are a bunch of people speaking a particular language in this part of this region, then you're allowed to propose that this can become a state, and hence all the states of India have been divided based on the language spoken in that region. So the language spoken in Goa was Konkani. And we will actually have to have a whole new podcast about this idea of the language of Goa, because this is another story in itself. Or rather, this is another history in itself. But coming down to the idea of the stories being put out and the entertainment forms in these earlier times, since Konkani was the language on which Goa was established and created into a state, the language Konkani obviously was being used by the society, and these entertainment forms were in this language. Now, the language again is called Konkani, and this language has been basically getting richer and richer since it's being recorded and written down, etc. However, the time when we were talking about is a time where all the people were doing entertainment forms and art forms. Now, art in this time was literally art. In the sense, the people who actually came and performed were not really people who knew how to read and write clearly, especially musicians. So the musicians, for instance, not really the people who were probably even understanding how to read and write, but the musicians who were playing the songs. If you think about these guys were people who would just memorize the song and by ear play the entire song. because some of them did not know how to read and write music. And the idea was to put up a story for the people. The idea was not to get experts and put the bunch of experts together and create something. No. These were members of society themselves. These were people. These were just normal people who would like to come together and create forms of entertainment and basically put out a message. So there is always a reason as to why an artist is doing something. And many a times there is even no reason. But in this case, the type of art form had a conscious touch to it. And the conscious element here was to put out a message. So as we understand that there were traditional street plays, and these were called khels or phel. These traditional street plays, as was mentioned, happened in bunches of 3. So when one group would come, they would present one play of 45 minutes, then they would have some songs in between and a small break, and then another play of another 45 minutes, and then the third one. And whether we like it or not, the clear understanding from the historians here is that all the people just stayed and watched, irrespective of what was going on around them. Now here is where we must understand, these plays were done at a particular time of the year, and this was a time which was celebrated by almost the whole world. Almost. Now these times were called the Carnival. And at this time, somewhere around in February, when this carnival would take place, we would have even the Brazilian samba carnival come over and celebrate the carnival with us in Goa. This has happened more recently, of course. But the point being, this traditional carnival entertainment has been going on since a long time. And this is where there was a chance to perform traditional street plays from Goa. And this is how they were performed even before the 1800s and kept on going till about 1892, when we actually came up with this very refined, much more refined art form of the traditional Goan Tiatr. Now, understanding Goa has only been a situation because there are many people who see it from different perspectives. Like, for example, in one part of the world, when you say Goa, they are not really aware that this is actually a state. They are actually thinking this is some Goa music or Goa party. Now, this is because there was a psychedelic trance movement which began in the state of Goa, and this already came from the 60s and 70s and the accumulation of many citizens of the world in Goa. And this is how Goa actually first became popular, that it is a nice free space to go and really chill and relax, where there were birds chirping, like they're chirping right now in the background, and there are nice sounds of nature which would really impress your mind. And hence, all of these people came here, and this started a music movement on the beach because of the full moon, since there was no electricity. And as these full moon gatherings got bigger in the late nights to watch the moon set, to celebrate the night instead of always celebrating the day or being awake in the day, this led to the formation of gatherings which were then called psytrance parties and now are called Goa parties or Goa music in different other parts of the world. So there is no understanding that this is a geographic region or a state in India. Not really. So to understand first that this is a state, and then think of the people from the earlier times and the people from all over the world and societies who have entertainment forms, this society as well and these people as well from this region had their own entertainment forms. And today's show is basically dedicated to the traditional carnival street play. This was an idea which was all over Goa for many years, and it was something which was part of the population. This is how they really felt about each other and themselves, and that is why it was being expressed. Now, for the other amount of information, also coming out in spurts and stories, these plays were something which we do till today and we celebrate till today. This art form has not stopped. And we also do this during the time of Carnival and at the end of the Lent season or during the Easter celebration in the Christianity side of things. However, these were basically time periods which were popular for holidays by the state as well. And hence, there was a lot of public moving around, and hence this was the need to have them on these days so that the people can actually walk around the city or walk around the villages and tune into one of these lovely art forms taking place just around the corner from someone's huge house or someone's compound or the church square, for instance. So how it went was, during the Portuguese time, there was of course a lot of dictatorship ruling, and there was an idea of even censors which does not exist today anymore. Also manifesting the free India mindset. Even the Tiatr today has no censor. You are allowed freedom of expression and freedom of opinion. Of course, the freedom of expression and opinion is not meant to hurt someone, because that is actually not freedom, because that is curbing somebody else's behavior or type of thinking, etc. And this is something which was also responsible for the art form of Tiatr coming up, which was the negatives of human behavior, where we actually indulge in slander and things like mudslinging when we are not aware and our defenses are very high, and hence there is a situation created. A situation where people are not comfortable with certain other types of people who have spoken about them before or have spoken about them in not a nice light without being directly spoken to or even after being directly spoken with. So without getting into the calisthenics of how and where and why conversations became like this, the point was this mudslinging character was what led to the formation of a newer art form. And here the pledge was, we will do it in a better way. So as we go to the beginning of the show where we said theatre has been responsible for refining human behavior overall in the world, as we understand that theatre is performed in various societies all over the world, as we understand that one of the elements of theatre performed from all over the world was and is a traditional carnival play. This fail or khel, as known in Konkani, performed in Goa, is something that continues, and we have now lived the part where we don't even need the censor anymore, that the people themselves are so well oriented with what can insult and what would trigger some trouble that there is absolutely no censor for these things. However, going back to the time when there was a dictatorship, there used to be a censor. So every play which was made had to be given to this department of the Portuguese dictator, and they had to review it just to check if there was nothing against the state. So you were not allowed to say anything against the state. And this was why the censor was existing. So everybody was actually sending their scripts and going along with their scripts and giving this to this department. And after that, they had to actually perform the entire 3 place in front of the regidor's house. Now the regidor was the person in charge of checking these plays. And after going through their scripts, he had to see it for himself. And this finally led to letting this play being performed in public. However, the idea, even though they were within the dictatorship claw, was not to hit out at the dictatorship. The idea was to bring out moral stories of people in the domestic setting of things, in our own houses and homes, how we treat our people at home or how we treat our children at home, and how these behaviors are nice/not nice subjectively to many people, and how basically these can be refined. So the idea of seeing something and wanting not to be like this was being taken into consideration, and hence it was a lovely way of understanding human behavior overall. So going back to the understanding of the censors, which was there only during the time of dictatorship, these censors then no longer existed. As soon as the state of Goa got its liberation, and there was no more dictatorship. And in the eyes of many people, this was freedom that we got. That we don't have to really consider too many things when making a remark or statement about the state of affairs around us. Now this type of khel or fail or Goan traditional street play has its roots in all the indigenous folk of Goa. Of course, times have moved on and we've come from these indigenous lifestyles to different other lifestyles, more populated with material things. And you see, these material things are not something that has changed us totally, because human behavior is also around the same reactions and actions of what we do and how we are at our comfort zones, which are our homes and the village space around us, etc. So just to understand the quiet villages of Goa during this time of the carnival, where noise had to be made in order to have the next few days or 40 days of abstinence from celebration, this particular type of noise was what was the excitement. When you were sitting back in your house and you were already aware that this was the time of the carnival, and now there would be some carnival plays going on the streets, you were already waiting for those sounds of crackers and music and musicians who were just walking by. So this was understanding how the villages of Goa experienced this phenomenon. Now you see, the villages of Goa are very serene, quiet villages where all you can hear is birds around you and the sound of the wind in the trees. Like, this is the idea. Like right now, sitting in Goa, all that can be heard in the background is birds, since there are many ecosystems created by smaller spaces. And hence, the vegetation around and the flora and fauna around gives enough of peace for the mind and serenity for the mind. And then, when the time comes, there is noise. And when the noise has to be made, it has to be made, it has to be heard, and everyone has to hear this, because this is an element of ourselves which we also need to go through. It's an experience of hearing something loud so that you can appreciate the softer sides of sounds. So the understanding from the point of view of the villages in Goa. Now the villages in Goa are extremely serene and peaceful and quiet, especially the further villages which are not like close to the city, just like all over the world. And here we find the wind, the sounds of the wind through the trees as something which is a regular sound effect, apart from, of course, the birds all around. And these things are seen with such lovely serenity and peace that it is hence an important element also to feel the sound. And when there needs to be noise, there needs to be noise. And this is exactly how we contrast and realize the peace and serenity and appreciate the peace and serenity because of the sound. Be it sounds of construction, or be it sounds of the road, and be it sounds of the birds. These sounds finally get overpowered by the sounds of music. And this is what we call celebration. Of course, in the modern times, it's more important to be probably louder than the sounds around you, because the sounds around you are already higher in decibels. Like the natural sounds around you in a city are already as high as 70 to 80 decibels because of trains and prams and things like this going around you. And in the lesser noisier cities, they are already at about 60 decibels, which basically brings us to understand that the sound law, which has been imposed in India, of course, has come from an idea that the American side of the fence, where the sound laws first streamed out from, did studies on how much sound the ears could hear. And this is what led to creation of sound laws. Now the interesting part here is, according to sound laws around here, beyond 10 o'clock you cannot have more than 55 decibels of sound, and before 10 o'clock you can have about 65 decibels of sound, which is totally unfathomable because the sound of the sea and the waves itself goes way above 65 decibels. Now, of course, the sound law is more specific to understand that if you need to measure the sound of how loud, then it has to be measured from the boundary of the location creating the sound. Now, while we go to a small detour for this, we do understand the senselessness of this particular law, especially when it cites decibel levels as low as 55 and 65. Now, the idea of sound and the idea of noise. Now, these seem to be very correlated, but they are two separate things in terms of one man's food is another man's poison. And not to get deep into this, the idea of trying to mention this was only to understand that every society needs certain amount of sounds to understand silence and how peace and serenity works. Now, it's always been like this all throughout our lives. We need certain amount of rain so we can know what nice feelings we have when there is sunshine. Now, this does not mean we have to curse the rain or say that this is not good weather. This also does not mean that we have to curse music and sound and say that this is not good. This goes to make us understand that there is an understanding of things with the way they contrast. And we are simply human beings who will learn and refine as time goes by. So hopefully we will get a better understanding and have a better tolerance level towards things like noise and sound. Just to realize that these are parts of society wherein noise and sound are totally involved, like for celebrations. Then there is the concept of fireworks and things like this, which can be argued endlessly. But as we understand a refined idea of art, and we understand the state of Goa, where this came from, we understand that this form of art was during the time of the carnival, which was a time specifically where you are allowed to and expected to make some noise. And this noise was not made to piss off someone or to get someone in a not nice space, but this sound was made by music and musicians and a group of people who would tour all around the village or several villages sometimes and have this gathering of 3 folk plays. And these plays would usually be of a particular genre, Like the first one would be of a political genre, the second one would be of a tragedy genre, and the third one, which was always the best seen, was the comedy. So these three plays were kept of three different contrasts, and hence the appreciation value was retained. And like we understand, comic relief is something what we really like. So the last play was usually, as said before, a more comedy oriented play, like from the genre of comedy. Now there are things and people who have been connected with this sort of traditional art form, and since this has been going even before this traditional art form was first played out, called Tiatr in Goa, the idea of understanding the concept becomes more important than knowing the people, because very few people exist who are actually sons and daughters of these, from those who are specially creating the traditional carnival plays. There are many names which will be found in this book, which is called Konkani Theatre, and then there is a into bracket which opens that says, later baptized as Konkani non-stop show, where the bracket closes. It is a book again by Wilson Mazzarello, and it has been published in Goa. And this goes on to tell us how these traditional plays which were on the ground transgressed into something else. And this is very another interesting aspect of how first there were traditional street plays, and these were all over the village, and then there were Tiatros that came up in 1892 onwards, and finally there was a mix between the Tiatr, which was theatre which was on stage and in a particular theatre hall and setting. And this is a very nice contrast of how the type of art and entertainment form moved on. Like first there was the street plays, then at about 1892 came the theatre, which was totally performed on stage and within a hall and not on the streets. And a little after that, there seemed to be people from this side who were performing street plays, who also at some point came on stage with the street plays and began to call that a street play theatre or a non-stop show. Now the reason for calling it a non-stop show is simply because the theatre was a specific number of acts. So the concept of Tiatr, just to touch up again from the first podcast for those who have not tuned in, is theatre which is performed in Goa, but it is performed on the stage, and there are four particular elements that make this art form an extremely unique art form of theatre from all over the world. These comprise of the first one, which is the acts in a theatre need to be only 7 or 6 acts. There cannot be more, there cannot be less. This was a thing which they decided to stick by. Between these acts, there will be unrelated songs, which in Konkani is called Kantar, and the plural version is Kantaran. Then the third element was that there would be comedy again, which had to be within the storyline and not separately as jokes. And there would need to be different types of songs. There would need to be this variety, a particular type of variety of Kantaran, as the Kantarans were specific to between the acts. When the act behind was changing or had to change to something else, they would put these unrelated songs in between. Now when the act was going on, some part of it had songs as well. It was like a semi-musical. It was not like the musical way that the traditional street theatre was using almost all of its dialogues, or about 80% of its dialogues, with music and singing them out. In this theatre, there were only two cantos which were sung, and this is a necessity to be sung so that it brings out the element of song in theatre, which is within the theatre. Now, these songs were called cantos and were smaller versions which were sung when the play became emotional. And hence this part of emotion was expressed as a song. We can hear a lot more from these sides, and coming from Goa, which has so many cultural aspects, this is one of the aspects which is the most popular. There are people who go and watch these things even today, and these are people not only from Goa in these current times, but from different parts of the world as well as different parts of India. Being a tourist state and having such nice landscapes, there are many people that come here, and hence we need to be very, very understanding of the culture from this space, like the culture of any space. Now, there may be a mix and match of people going through Goa, so much so that there would be much lesser of this indigenous population as more settlers come in. Of course, this is a matter of governance, and how the governance of this place keeps the integrity and the identity intact without letting it get lost. Well, for these purposes, we don't really rely on things like governance, especially in Goa. The people have been conscious enough to have their own street plays since the ages, since centuries before. And even today, these street plays, these traditional carnival plays continue. They continue in different parts of the year as well. And these plays are totally respected by the audiences in Goa, at least. And when you're walking by, if you actually see such a play, it would be lovely to just be part of it and stand there. What will be done next in this show is I will play a little part of the plays just for you to get an idea of how these pan out. Now, these are songs, so what you have to imagine is on a street corner which has enough of space where the traffic will not be disturbed. The people gather around, and usually they have a circle made by a string, and there are a group of people in the middle who start to sing. And as the music continues, there are people who notice and tune in and stop by. And as the music goes on, the play begins, and the play is of course full of cantos, or it's a musical. So the music just don't stop. And it goes on for 45 minutes showing one genre of a play. And then for another 45 minutes showing another one. And then finally the third one. So these group of 3 plays is something which can be imagined. And maybe I can even play a little bit of it from the end of this radio show, just to give you an idea of how a song from this play will sound like, or sounds like. Now, we would like to have more people on the show and interview them, and probably this is going to happen in the near future. And one of the things that we need to understand is these art forms were very specifically led down by families, or these things would also be like after one generation, the next generation would take up organizing these plays, and then the next generation below him would take up organizing these plays. So the families that were involved from the earlier times seem to be still involved with these plays and seem to be still organizing. which will bring us to a very exciting episode in the near future or even later about the families of Goa. Because as we see the demographic structure of Goa, we have diluted this population with populations like 1.6 billion from the rest of India, and then the remaining billions from the rest of the world, all of whom would like to visit Goa at some point or the other. And when they do visit Goa, have a thought of even living here. Now, even if 1% of these people who come here decides to live here, it is very nice. However, that 1% would be so much that we will probably have very few Goans around. And this brings us to the concept of Goa families, which are now trying to preserve themselves as the last groups of elements from Goa. Because in the future, when the demography changes to a point where we will all be diluted, or we possibly can be diluted, since we are only about 12 to 1400,000 people in all who are indigenously from Goa, we will see that as we are overpopulated with settlers from all over the world in India, that we will come down to this concept of Goa families, where Goa families, like the ones indulging in tradition and culture, will keep and preserve and save these traditions and cultural aspects. One of them, and one of the oldest forms, being Tiatr, and actually performed totally on the streets with no curtains and nothing else except the people. We should be in a position to understand how these sounds sound like in the present times. But in the previous times, what's been happening is there used to be a trumpet player and a drum. And that's about it. So this drum, which was not even the whole drum set that we see today on stage, where bands play a whole drum set, this was just a snare drum and maybe one or two things at the side which could make a similar sound. And that was it. So there was just little music, and there was a group of people. And now this has refined itself, of course, to the keyboards and the guitar and a whole orchestra accompanying a whole group of singers and people from the indigenous sides of Goa. Now, when we understand Goa, we do understand that there are many types of religious communities in Goa, and there seems to be no sort of element of difference between these, because this is how the Goa people have been living. And there have been fests celebrated from different sides, like for example, when the season of Lent takes place for the Christian community in Goa, seemingly also there is the Ramzan period that is taking place, and this is another 30 days, and that is like 40 days or some similar amount of days, which are spiritual apparently according to religious lines, and are actually taking place at the same time. Which means there are elements like, for example, for Lent, there are many of my friends and people from the Christian side who abstain from alcohol and luxuries of life for these 40 days due to religious reasons. But most of these reasons are actually not even religious. They are actually a reason for having a break. Because during the remaining parts of the year, we have a lot of visitors coming all the time, and that would mean that we would indulge in a lot of food and drink with our guests. And these come across as some very nice periods which can help us give up giving the excuse of religion and actually experiencing the side of spirituality. Let's put it like that.
तुगे मामा आता सरपंच या गावा ना वहा मका म्हणजे मोगा कोट मले सिंगतलो भरि काम लाग्तलो भरि चिडवा भोकाल पठलो देखो काले जातलो अनि तुक सुनो बरे भाइ हैप्पी ना very very going to money go आवे
Tarde more, one yeta more ya pare. One mata, this one is no rusai, monta vere. Oi so ramdu moor gaite, maka gomona. My mata, that is all man, I love Rosya Gullo Lomura Lomoji Gotan Potana Doria Sosuk Maka Gordi Kona Kuzwai Magona Doria Sosuk Maka Gordi Kona Kuzwai Magona.
And those, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, were a few clips, two of them actually. They were from Konkani traditional folk play. And these are live recorded, so please excuse the sound quality, of course, but this is also to grab the authenticity of exactly how they sound, because they are on the street, of course, and the sound is not really manageable to the best optimal extent because of the area and the open space. So in all eventuality, these were two pieces just to present to you. One was a dialogue which was between a mother and her son. And she seems to be very specifically mentioning exactly what she wants from her son in this life ahead. And one of the things that she is insistent and particular about is that her son marries a rich woman, and definitely not someone from the poor side. Now, the story in this is revolving around the lady who's actually the sarpanch of the village, which means the chief of the village. So every village in India is governed by a panchayat system. This panchayat system is wherein there are 5 members elected from the village as the committee that runs the village. Yeah. So here, amongst these 5 members, one of them is the head. And the reason for the head is signatures, etc. So these 5 members are the panchas, and the chief is the sarpanch. And this is the panchayat system of governance that runs all villages of India. So townships which have become big are governed by municipalities, and villages which are still having lesser populations are governed by the village panchayat, in which there exists this committee of 5 panchas, and one of these 5 is the sarpanch. So while we just explain this political structure of administration, just getting back to this small clip, this lady is telling her son to necessarily engage with a woman who's from a rich family and rich. And hence this is the idea brought by the playwright, who's talking about the mindset of such a person who's full of material wealth and is now wishing for the same for her beloved son. Well, natural like any mama. This play goes on to feature many more things that happen because of this sort of desire for wealth. Now the second was the clip, which was a song, and it was sung as a solo with backing vocals, if you could figure them out in the background. And this was a very popular lineage of artists who were into traditional street folk plays of Goa. So there was a gentleman by the name of, by the nickname, not by the real name, but by the nickname of Batagoto. Now Batagoto means grain of, one single grain, okay, a grain. And this was the gentleman whose family was into carnival street folk plays, and this tradition now has been continued by the next generation from his family and the family after his son and his grandson, so on and so forth. And it's a very interesting understanding where you see how families have been involved with their trades that their families, previous generation families, have been into. And this has been continuing, but this has been continuing as a passion. Because India was also having a system where every person in the village had their own job. And someone was the shoemaker, someone was the carpenter, someone was the bread man. And hence these jobs were divided equally amongst the people of the village. And these jobs sometimes even kept on going from generation to generation, but with urbanization entering in, these cycles from generation were cut away. And there was a sort of distortion in these cycles, and maybe it was not very common for a bread man's son to become a bread man. But here in this context of this art form of the traditional carnival street theatre, we see this alive, and it's a very nice thing to continue with tradition from your previous ancestors. Well, preserving culture is one thing, but the last song that was played was also a sad song, and the song also shows another type of situation. So this is a song of a gentleman who is talking about how he has been stereotyped by the entire society because he does not have parents and a rich upbringing. And he says this in a song, that he's been called nicknames and he's been taunted at and made fun of because of his status. But in spite of this, he says that he does not wish anything bad for any of such people who are living on stereotypes. Because he knows that they are living on stereotypes. And that if these very people knew beyond these stereotypes, then they themselves would not behave in the manner that they were behaving with him. So his life of being singled out was what he was singing about, what he was expressing himself with this idea of maybe sadness of how people have around things when they feel hurt. So he was singing about it in this fashion and was expressing himself with regards to how he feels about this. And the main element as he ends the song is the fact that he forgives all of them and has nothing against such people and will not hold it against them. But he will go on his own and make himself a better person. So this was the mindset from the second song and how it came across to the audiences. And here we understand how these plays are reflecting the mindsets and characters in our everyday surrounding. And maybe this sends you on an imaginative voyage, and if not, we always have the Goan traditional folk street play. Do come and tune in.